I never thought my best friend would be the one to destroy everything I had worked for. 3 years ago, when I walked into that small marketing agency in downtown Portland, I was just hoping to find a place where I could grow my career. What I found instead was something that would test every ounce of strength I had inside me. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who can hurt you the most, and sometimes the biggest betrayals come wrapped in the sweetest smiles. Before we dive into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Please hit that like button if this story resonates with you, and do not forget to subscribe for more real stories that matter. Trust me, you will want to stay until the very end of this one. My name is Claudia, and I had just turned 28 when I landed what I thought was my dream job at Creative Solutions, a boutique marketing firm that specialized in helping small businesses tell their stories. The office was everything I had imagined when I dreamed of working in marketing. Exposed brick walls lined with colorful campaign posters, standing desks scattered throughout an open floor plan, and the constant hum of creative energy that made every morning feel like possibility itself. On my first day, Sarah Martinez walked over to my desk with 2 steaming cups of coffee and the kind of genuine smile that immediately put me at ease. She was 32, had been with the company for 4 years, and seemed to know everyone and everything about how things really worked. Her dark hair was always perfectly styled, and she had this way of making even the most mundane office conversations feel important and interesting. "Welcome to the chaos," she said, settling into the chair next to mine. "I know starting somewhere new can feel overwhelming, but I promise you will love it here. This place really values creativity and collaboration." From that moment, Sarah became more than just a colleague. She took me under her wing in ways that went far beyond what anyone would expect from a coworker. When I struggled with our project management software, she stayed late to walk me through every feature. When I felt intimidated by client presentations, she helped me practice my pitch until I felt confident enough to command any room. We started having lunch together every Tuesday and Thursday, usually at this little sandwich shop 3 blocks from the office. Those conversations were where I really got to know her. She told me about her divorce 2 years earlier, how she had fought to rebuild her confidence and independence. I shared my own struggles with imposter syndrome and the pressure I felt to prove myself in a competitive industry. "The thing about this business," she said one afternoon over turkey and Swiss, "is that ideas are everything, but you have to be smart about protecting them. Not everyone here is as trustworthy as they seem." At the time, I thought she was just giving me general advice about office politics. I had no idea she was preparing me for something I would never see coming. Our friendship deepened over the next 18 months. We celebrated each other's wins, commiserated over difficult clients, and developed inside jokes that made even the longest Monday meetings bearable. When my grandmother passed away unexpectedly, Sarah was the first person to show up at my apartment with groceries, and the kind of understanding presence that you only get from true friendship. The turning point came in January of my 2nd year. Our agency had been selected to pitch for the biggest account in company history. Riverside Regional Hospital needed a complete rebranding campaign, including everything from a new logo to a comprehensive digital marketing strategy. The contract was worth $200,000, which would represent nearly 30% of our annual revenue. Marcus Thompson, our creative director, called an all-hands meeting to discuss the pitch process. The conference room felt electric with anticipation as 12 of us gathered around the polished oak table that had witnessed countless brainstorming sessions. "This is our chance to really put Creative Solutions on the map," Marcus announced, his enthusiasm filling the room. "I want everyone contributing ideas, but we need to be strategic about how we approach this. I am thinking we create 2 teams and see which direction feels strongest." That was when Sarah suggested something that would change everything. "What if Claudia and I worked together on the initial concept development?" she proposed, looking directly at me with that encouraging smile I had come to trust completely. "We have been collaborating really well on smaller projects, and I think we could create something special for this." Marcus nodded approvingly. I like that. You two have good chemistry, and Claudia brings fresh perspectives that could be exactly what we need for a healthcare client. I felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervousness. This was the kind of opportunity I had been hoping for since I started at the agency. Working on a major pitch would establish me as someone capable of handling significant clients and complex campaigns. Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah and I spent countless hours developing what we both knew was exceptional work. The concept we created centered around the idea of healing connections and emphasized how Riverside Regional could become more than just a hospital, but a true community wellness partner. The research phase consumed most of February. Sarah and I divided responsibilities carefully, with me focusing on demographic analysis and competitive research, while she handled stakeholder interviews and brand positioning. We met every morning at 7:30 an hour before the official workday began to review our progress and refine our strategy. I threw myself into understanding everything about Riverside Regional Hospital. I spent hours analyzing their current marketing materials, studying patient satisfaction surveys, and researching healthcare marketing trends across the Pacific Northwest. What I discovered was fascinating. The hospital had strong clinical outcomes and an excellent reputation among medical professionals, but they struggled to connect with patients on an emotional level. Their existing brand felt cold and institutional. The logo was a generic medical cross in corporate blue, and their website read like a medical textbook, rather than a welcoming introduction to a place where people came during some of the most vulnerable moments of their lives. We need to humanize everything, I told Sarah during one of our early morning sessions. People do not choose a hospital because of fancy equipment or impressive credentials. They choose based on trust, comfort, and feeling like they will be treated as individuals rather than case numbers. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. And that is where the healing connections concept becomes powerful. We are not just promoting medical services, we are promoting relationships. The visual identity I developed played into this perfectly. Instead of sterile medical imagery, I created a system based on interlocking circles that could represent anything from family bonds to the connection between patient and caregiver. The color palette moved away from traditional hospital blues toward warmer tones that suggested comfort and hope. The tagline I proposed was, "Where healing begins with caring." It was simple enough to remember, but sophisticated enough to work across all their communications, from billboard advertisements to social media campaigns. Sarah was working on the strategic positioning document, which would explain how all these visual and messaging elements would work together to reshape public perception of Riverside Regional. She interviewed current patients, former patients, and family members to understand their emotional journey through the healthcare system. "The insights I am getting are incredible," she told me one afternoon as we reviewed her interview notes. "People want to feel heard, respected, and confident that their medical team genuinely cares about their well-being. That has to be the foundation of everything we recommend." By the middle of March, we had created something that felt truly special. The presentation deck was 73 slides of comprehensive strategy, creative executions, and implementation timelines. We had mock-ups showing how the new brand would look on everything from business cards to ambulances. We had developed a social media strategy that would transform their online presence from informational to inspirational. The night before our presentation to Marcus and the rest of the creative team, Sarah and I stayed until almost midnight, rehearsing our pitch and making final adjustments to our materials. The office was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. "I cannot believe how good this is," Sarah said, as we clicked through the presentation one final time. "This could seriously change how people think about Riverside Regional. And honestly, Claudia, this could change how people think about creative solutions too." I felt a mixture of pride and nervous anticipation. "We make a good team," I said. I never could have developed something this strong working alone. Neither could I, she replied. That is what makes great creative work: collaboration and trust. The next morning, March 15th, we presented our concept to the internal team. The response was everything we could have hoped for. Marcus was visibly impressed, asking detailed questions about implementation timelines and budget requirements. Jenny Walsh, our account director, kept nodding and taking notes as we walked through each component of the strategy. This is exactly the kind of thinking that will win this account, Marcus said when we finished. You two have created something that goes far beyond what they asked for. This is not just a rebranding campaign. This is a complete transformation of how they connect with their community. The presentation to Riverside Regional was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Marcus decided that Sarah and I would present together with support from him and Jenny for questions about budget and project management. Over the weekend, I refined our presentation materials one final time. I wanted every transition to feel seamless, every slide to build naturally toward our final recommendations. This was my chance to establish myself as someone capable of leading major client relationships, and I was determined to make the most of it. On Monday evening, Sarah suggested we run through the presentation one more time at her apartment. She lived in a converted loft in the Pearl District with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. We ordered Chinese takeout and spread our materials across her dining room table. "Tomorrow is going to be incredible," she said as we practiced our opening remarks. I have a really good feeling about this. I trusted her instincts completely. After 18 months of working together, I had learned that Sarah had an almost supernatural ability to read clients and predict which directions would resonate most strongly. If she felt confident about our chances, that meant something significant. What I did not know was that she had already scheduled a meeting with Marcus for 8 o'clock Tuesday morning, 90 minutes before our client presentation was set to begin. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp March weather that made Portland feel full of possibility. I arrived at the office at 7:15, wanting extra time to review our materials and make sure everything was perfect for the 9:30 presentation. The conference room was reserved for our final rehearsal at 8:45, which would give us time to address any last-minute concerns before the clients arrived. But when I walked past Marcus's office at 7:45, I saw Sarah sitting across from his desk with a folder in her hands and an expression I had never seen before. Through the glass partition, I could see Marcus leaning forward intently, occasionally nodding as Sarah spoke. Something about their body language felt strange, almost secretive. I told myself it was probably just last-minute presentation logistics. Maybe Sarah had thought of additional budget considerations or implementation details that needed to be discussed before we met with the client. Still, a small knot of uneasiness settled in my stomach. At 8:15, Sarah emerged from Marcus's office with a smile that seemed different somehow. Less genuine than the thousands of smiles I had grown to trust over our months of friendship. "Ready for the big day?" she asked as she approached my desk. "Absolutely." "What were you and Marcus discussing?" "Oh, just some final details about the presentation flow," she said casually. "He wanted to make sure we were covering all the strategic elements the client is most interested in." Something in her tone did not feel right, but I could not identify exactly what was bothering me. We had less than an hour before our rehearsal, and I needed to focus on delivering the best presentation of my career. At 9:25, the clients arrived. David Richardson was the Chief Marketing Officer for Riverside Regional, a man in his early 50s with gray hair and the kind of calm confidence that comes from decades of experience in healthcare administration. With him was Amanda Foster, their communications director, who looked to be about my age and had done her research about our agency. "We are really excited about what you have developed for us," David said as we settled around the conference room table. "Your initial proposal suggested some interesting directions that could really differentiate us in this market." Marcus handled the introductions and then turned the presentation over to Sarah and me. This was our moment to demonstrate everything we had created over the past 2 months. Sarah began with the strategic overview explaining how we had analyzed their current market position and identified opportunities for growth. Her presentation was flawless, covering everything from demographic research to competitive analysis with the kind of confidence that made complex information feel accessible and compelling. Then it was my turn to present the creative execution. I clicked to my first slide, which showed the current Riverside Regional logo alongside our proposed new identity system. The contrast was dramatic. Where their existing brand felt cold and institutional, our new approach was warm, human, and sophisticated. The visual identity we have developed is based on the concept of healing connections. I began feeling the familiar rush of excitement that comes with presenting work you truly believe in. Every element from the interlocking circle logo to the color palette is designed to communicate that Riverside Regional understands healthcare is fundamentally about relationships. I walked them through the logo applications, showing how it would look on everything from hospital signage to digital platforms. Then I presented the advertising campaign concepts, the social media strategy, and the complete brand guidelines that would ensure consistent implementation across all touchpoints. David and Amanda were engaged throughout the presentation, asking thoughtful questions and taking detailed notes. When I finished the creative portion, Marcus and Jenny covered budget and timeline details. This is exactly the kind of comprehensive thinking we were hoping for, Amanda said when we concluded. You have clearly invested significant time in understanding our challenges and opportunities. David nodded in agreement. We will be making our final decision by Friday and will be in touch early next week. After they left, the energy in the conference room was electric. Marcus was visibly pleased with how the presentation had gone, and Jenny was already talking about implementation timelines and project kickoff strategies. That felt really strong, Sarah said as we gathered our materials. I think we have a genuine shot at winning this. I agreed completely. We had delivered exactly the kind of strategic and creative thinking that would set Riverside Regional apart from their competitors. More importantly, we had demonstrated that creative solutions could handle complex high-value accounts with the sophistication that major clients expect. What I did not know was that our presentation had been recorded and that Sarah had made arrangements to send a copy to someone outside our agency. Thursday morning, Marcus called an all-hands meeting. When we gathered in the conference room, his expression was more serious than I had seen since I started working at the agency. I received a call yesterday evening that I need to share with everyone, he began. Riverside Regional has decided to move forward with their rebranding campaign. However, they will not be working with Creative Solutions. The room went completely silent. Jenny was the first to speak. Did they give a reason I thought our presentation went really well? Marcus looked directly at me, and I saw something in his expression that made my blood run cold. They told me they had received a similar presentation from another agency, a presentation that included many of the same strategic insights and creative executions that we presented on Tuesday. They have decided to work with that agency instead. The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked around the room trying to process what Marcus was telling us. How could another agency have developed the same ideas we had spent months creating? Which agency? I asked, my voice barely audible. Marcus hesitated for a moment before answering. Sterling Creative Group. I had never heard of Sterling Creative Group, but when I looked at Sarah, I saw something in her expression that told me everything I needed to know. The rest of that meeting passed in a blur of confusion and disappointment. As my colleagues filed out of the conference room discussing how we could have lost such a promising opportunity, I remained seated at the table trying to make sense of what had just happened. Sarah approached me with the same concerned expression she had worn during every difficult moment we had shared over the past 18 months. Claudia, I am so sorry. I know how much this project meant to you. I looked at her carefully, searching her face for any sign of the truth I was beginning to suspect. "Sarah, have you ever heard of Sterling Creative Group?" "I do not think so. Why?" But something about the way she answered a slight hesitation before the words told me she was lying. For the first time since I had known her, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. That afternoon, I did something I had never imagined I would need to do. I started investigating my closest friend and colleague. Sterling Creative Group had a minimal online presence, which was unusual for a marketing agency. Their website had been registered just 6 weeks earlier, and their portfolio consisted of only 3 case studies, none of which showed work comparable to what would be required for a hospital rebranding campaign. The business registration documents were public record. Sterling Creative Group was incorporated in February, with Sarah Martinez listed as the sole proprietor and creative director. I sat at my desk, staring at the computer screen, feeling like everything I thought I knew about my life had suddenly shifted into something unrecognizable. Sarah had created a competing agency while we were working together on the Riverside regional pitch. She had used our friendship, our collaboration, and my trust to gain access to work that she then presented as her own. But I needed proof before I could confront her, or take any action. Over the next 2 days, I carefully documented everything I could find about Sterling Creative Group and their pitch to Riverside Regional. The breakthrough came when I contacted Amanda Foster directly. I called her Friday afternoon, ostensibly to follow up on our presentation, and thank her for the opportunity to present our ideas. "Amanda, I wanted to ask about the other presentation you mentioned receiving. We are always interested in understanding how our approach compared to other agencies." There was a pause before she answered. "Actually, Claudia, I was surprised by how similar the presentations were. The other agency even used some of the same language and visual concepts that you presented. Their creative director said she had been working on healthcare branding for several years." "What was the name of their creative director?" "Sarah Martinez. She seemed really knowledgeable about the industry." My hands were shaking as I hung up the phone. The scope of Sarah's betrayal was even larger than I had imagined. She had not just stolen our ideas, she had positioned herself as the original creator and expert behind concepts that I had developed. That evening, I sat in my apartment trying to decide what to do with what I had learned. Confronting Sarah directly would give her an opportunity to destroy evidence or create alternative explanations. Going to Marcus immediately might result in a situation where it was her word against mine. I needed a strategy that would expose the truth in a way that could not be disputed or explained away. Over the weekend, I developed a plan that would require patience, careful documentation, and the kind of strategic thinking that Sarah had taught me during our months of collaboration. On Monday morning, I arrived at the office early and requested a meeting with Marcus. I had prepared a comprehensive presentation that included timeline documentation, email records, and business registration documents that proved Sarah's deception. "Marcus, I need to share something with you about the Riverside regional account that I think you should know." I presented everything methodically, starting with the timeline of Sterling Creative Group's incorporation and ending with Amanda Foster's confirmation that Sarah had presented our work as her own creation. Marcus listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly serious as I provided each piece of evidence. When I finished, he was quiet for several long moments. "Claudia, these are serious allegations. If what you are saying is true, this represents not just a violation of company policy, but potentially intellectual property theft. I understand that. I also understand that this is an incredibly difficult situation for you and for the agency. But I felt like I had to bring this forward because what Sarah did does not just affect me. It affects our entire team's trust in each other and our ability to collaborate on future projects." Marcus asked me to give him time to review the documentation I had provided and to conduct his own investigation before taking any action. That afternoon, he called Sarah into his office for what she presumably thought was a routine check in about ongoing projects. I was not privy to that conversation, but I learned later that Marcus had presented her with the evidence I had gathered and asked for her explanation. Sarah's response was to claim that the ideas for the Riverside Regional campaign had been primarily her creation and that I had contributed primarily research and administrative support. She suggested that she had every right to present her own creative work to potential clients, and that Sterling Creative Group represented her desire to pursue independent consulting opportunities. What she did not know was that Marcus had been recording their conversation and that I had prepared for exactly this response. The next morning, Marcus scheduled a meeting with Sarah, Jenny, and me to address what he called concerns about project collaboration and intellectual property. I had spent the previous evening preparing for what I knew would be the most important professional conversation of my life. Sarah had betrayed not just our friendship, but the foundational trust that makes creative collaboration possible. I was determined to respond with the kind of strategic precision that would leave no room for confusion about what had actually happened. When we gathered in the conference room, Sarah looked confident and composed. She had always been skilled at managing difficult conversations, and I could see that she had prepared her own narrative about the situation. Marcus began by outlining the concerns that had been brought to his attention and asking Sarah to respond to specific questions about Sterling Creative Group and her interactions with Riverside Regional Hospital. Sarah, can you explain the relationship between work you developed at Creative Solutions and the presentation you made to Riverside Regional through your independent consulting business? Sarah's response was carefully crafted and delivered with the same convincing sincerity that had characterized every interaction I had with her over 18 months of friendship. Marcus, I want to be completely transparent about this situation. The creative concepts I presented to Riverside Regional were based on strategic insights and industry knowledge that I have been developing throughout my career, including my time here at Creative Solutions. While Claudia contributed research and supported the development process, the core creative direction and brand positioning were ideas that I originated. She looked directly at me as she spoke, and I saw something in her expression that I had never noticed before. A coldness that had perhaps always been there, hidden behind the warmth and collaboration that I had trusted so completely. I understand that there may be some confusion about the collaborative nature of our work, but I want to emphasize that I have tremendous respect for Claudia's contributions. This was never intended to diminish her role in our team. It was a masterful response that acknowledged the situation while completely reframing the narrative to position her as the primary creator of our shared work. If I had not prepared extensively for this moment, her explanation might have created enough doubt to make the situation unresolvable. But I had documentation that would demonstrate not just what had happened, but the deliberate and systematic nature of her deception. Marcus, I appreciate Sarah's perspective, but I would like to share some additional information that might clarify the timeline and nature of our collaboration. I opened the folder I had prepared and began presenting evidence that I had gathered over the past week. Email threads showing my initial research and concept development. Time-stamped files demonstrating when specific creative elements had been created. Draft presentations showing the evolution of ideas that Sarah was now claiming as her original concepts. Most importantly, I had copies of our project management software records that showed who had created which files and when they had been modified. The digital trail was comprehensive and indisputable. These records show that the core creative concepts Sarah is discussing were developed collaboratively with significant contributions from both of us. The Healing Connections strategy, the interlocking circle logo system, and the Where Healing Begins with Caring tagline all originated from brainstorming sessions we conducted together with initial development work that I completed independently. I handed Marcus printouts showing the creation dates and modification history for each major component of our presentation. The evidence was overwhelming and impossible to explain away. Sarah's confidence began to falter as the documentation mounted. Her explanations became less coherent and she started contradicting statements she had made just minutes earlier. Jenny, who had remained quiet throughout the conversation, finally spoke up. "Sarah, did you incorporate Sterling Creative Group while we were working on the Riverside Regional pitch?" The question hung in the air for several seconds before Sarah answered. "Yes, but that was for future opportunities. I never intended for there to be any conflict with my work here." "But you did present creative solutions work to a client through your own company?" Jenny continued. How do you explain that Sarah's final response revealed everything about who she really was underneath the friendship and collaboration I had trusted for so long? "I think there has been a misunderstanding about the nature of intellectual property in creative work. Ideas cannot be owned by any one person, and the concepts we developed were not exclusively creative solutions property." It was a statement that demonstrated not just her willingness to steal from the agency and from me personally, but her complete lack of understanding about the ethical foundations that make creative teamwork possible. Marcus ended the meeting by informing Sarah that her employment with Creative Solutions was terminated immediately and that the agency would be consulting with legal counsel about potential intellectual property violations. But for me, the most important outcome was not her firing or the potential legal consequences she would face. The most important outcome was the realization that I had survived the worst kind of professional and personal betrayal and had found the strength to fight back with truth evidence and strategic thinking. As Sarah cleared out her desk that afternoon, she approached me one final time. "Claudia, I hope you can understand that this was never personal. This industry is competitive, and sometimes you have to make difficult choices to advance your career." I looked at her for the last time and realized that I felt nothing but pity for someone who could rationalize betraying a friendship as a career advancement strategy. "Sarah, what you did was not about career advancement. It was about choosing deception over integrity and taking credit for work that belonged to both of us. I hope someday you understand the difference." She left that afternoon, and I never saw her again. But my story was just beginning. The weeks following Sarah's departure were among the most difficult of my professional life. But they were also when I discovered strengths I never knew I possessed. Marcus offered me the opportunity to lead the effort to rebuild our relationship with Riverside Regional Hospital, armed with the documentation that proved our agency's original ownership of the creative concepts they had seen. I spent hours preparing for what felt like the most important presentation of my career. This was not just about winning back a client, but about demonstrating that creative solutions deserved trust and respect in an industry where reputation is everything. David Richardson agreed to meet with me, though he made it clear that Riverside Regional had already signed a contract with Sterling Creative Group and was not necessarily interested in reopening their decision. "David, I understand that you have already made your choice about this campaign, and I respect that business decisions have to be made based on the information available at the time. However, I think you deserve to know the full story about how the concepts you are implementing were actually developed." I presented the same documentation I had shared with Marcus, but I focused on what this meant for Riverside Regional's long-term brand strategy rather than the internal conflicts at our agency. The concern I have is not about which agency gets this contract, but about ensuring that you have the full strategic framework behind these concepts so they can be implemented effectively over time. The Healing Connections strategy works because it is grounded in specific research insights about your patient community and your competitive landscape. I shared the detailed research findings that had informed every creative decision, the patient interview insights that had shaped the messaging strategy, and the implementation roadmap that would ensure consistent brand expression across all their touchpoints. What became clear during our conversation was that Sterling Creative Group had presented the creative concepts without the strategic foundation that made them effective. They had the visual identity and the tagline, but they did not understand the research insights that made those elements resonate with Riverside Regional's specific audience. David, regardless of which agency you choose to work with, this research belongs to you and should inform how your new brand is implemented. You paid for strategic thinking, not just creative execution. By the end of our meeting, David had made a decision that surprised both of us. Rather than continuing with Sterling Creative Group or returning to Creative Solutions, Riverside Regional would hire me directly as an independent consultant to oversee the implementation of the brand strategy I had developed. Claudia, what impresses me is not just the quality of your creative work, but your integrity in how you have handled this entire situation. That tells me something important about how you will represent our organization. The consulting contract was worth more than my annual salary at Creative Solutions, but more importantly, it established me as someone capable of managing major client relationships independently. Marcus was supportive of my decision to accept the consulting opportunity, and we structured an arrangement where I would work part-time at Creative Solutions while building my independent practice. Over the next 6 months, I successfully led the implementation of the Riverside Regional rebrand, working directly with their internal marketing team and external vendors to ensure every touchpoint reflected the strategic insights we had developed. The campaign launch exceeded every expectation. Patient satisfaction scores improved, community engagement increased significantly, and Riverside Regional began receiving industry recognition for innovative healthcare marketing. But the most meaningful outcome was not the professional success or industry recognition. The most meaningful outcome was discovering that I could survive betrayal and respond with strength, strategy, and integrity. The experience with Sarah taught me that trust is precious precisely because it can be broken, but that betrayal does not have to define you. It can reveal capabilities you never knew you possessed and lead to opportunities you never could have imagined. Today, 3 years later, I run my own marketing consultancy with 12 employees and clients across the Pacific Northwest. We specialize in healthcare and nonprofit marketing, helping organizations tell stories that matter and build genuine connections with their communities. I learned that sometimes the worst things that happen to you professionally can become the foundation for the best things that follow. Sarah's betrayal forced me to become more independent, more strategic, and more confident in my own abilities than I would have been if our friendship had continued unchanged. I also learned that integrity is not just about doing the right thing when it is easy, but about choosing truth over convenience when the stakes are highest. Last month, I received a LinkedIn message from someone who identified herself as a former colleague of Sarah's at another agency. She had discovered that Sarah was presenting work developed by other team members as her own creation, and she was seeking advice about how to address the situation. I spent an hour on the phone with her sharing what I had learned about documentation evidence and the importance of speaking up when professional integrity is at stake. She later told me that our conversation gave her the confidence to expose Sarah's continued pattern of taking credit for collaborative work. Some people asked me if I felt satisfaction knowing that Sarah's deception had eventually caught up with her. The truth is, I felt something more complex than satisfaction. I felt grateful that my experience could help someone else navigate a similar betrayal with strength and strategy. The most powerful thing about surviving betrayal is not that it makes you harder or more cynical. The most powerful thing is that it teaches you to trust your own instincts, to value relationships that are based on genuine respect and integrity, and to respond to difficult situations with the kind of strategic thinking that creates positive outcomes, even from painful circumstances. I still believe in collaboration, friendship, and the creative energy that comes from working with people who share your values and vision. But I also trust my ability to recognize when those values are not being reciprocated and to take action that protects not just my own interests, but the integrity of the work we create together. The marketing industry is built on trust, creativity, and the kind of collaboration that makes exceptional work possible. Sarah's betrayal was not just about stealing ideas or credit. It was about violating the fundamental principles that make creative partnership valuable. But her betrayal also taught me that those principles are worth fighting for, and that sometimes the most important battles are the ones where you stand up for what is right, even when it would be easier to stay quiet. What have you learned from moments when someone you trusted betrayed that trust? Have you found the strength to turn betrayal into an opportunity for growth and positive change? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more real stories about overcoming professional challenges, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that betrayal does not have to define your future. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your integrity is the most valuable asset you will ever possess. Protect it, trust it, and let it guide you toward the relationships and opportunities that truly deserve your energy and creativity.